From advertising to software as a service to data.
Across all of our programs and clients, we've seen a 55 to 65% open rate.
Getting brands authentically integrated into content performs better than TV advertising.
Typical lifespan of an article is about 24 to 36 hours.
If we're reaching out to the right person with the right message and a clear call to action, then it's just a matter of timing.
Welcome to the Martech Podcast, a Ben J. Schaap LLC production. In this podcast, you'll hear the stories of world-class marketers that use technology to drive business results and achieve career success. We'll unearth the real-world experiences of some of the brightest minds in the marketing and technology space so you can learn the tools, tips, and tricks they've learned along the way. Now here's the host of the Martech Podcast, Benjamin Shapiro.
Hello, and welcome back to the Martech Podcast. It's just you and me today, marketers. And for those of you who are new to the Martech Podcast community, in this episode, like we do at the end of every month, I want to tell you how we practice what we preach in the marketing of this show. Well, we've made it to the end of November, and now that Thanksgiving has come and gone here in the United States, I want to start off this episode about talking about some of the things that I'm most thankful for from a career perspective. And honestly, a lot of it is how this podcast has grown over the year. I started recording content for the Martech Podcast in January of this year with the idea that it would be a project that built some awareness for my consulting business and helped with lead generation. And since the beginning of this year, this podcast has not only become the main focus of my career, but it's also helped me learn a ton about different channels of marketing, different styles of marketing. It's helped me create a new line of business in podcast recording, and most importantly, it's helped me to connect with other great marketers. So first and foremost, I just want to express my gratitude to our production staff for helping get this show off the ground, to our show's guests, who are really the thing that makes this show run, their expertise, and to you, our listeners. Thank you for lending me your ears and giving me your attention, and for helping to build this Martech podcast into a community. In my monthly update last month, we had the chance to celebrate reaching the 10,000 download per month goal, which was the original milestone we set out to reach on day one of the podcast. And before we turn our attention to our next set of goals, I wanted to bring up another milestone that I'm excited to celebrate with you. A few days ago, this podcast hit the 50,000 total download mark. So again, let me just say thank you to everyone who has helped produce, been a guest, or to you, our listeners, everybody that's been involved in the show. I really appreciate you. And as part of, Thanksgiving holiday, I just want to say I am thankful for all of your help with this show. So if I haven't said it enough, thank you for your patronage to this show. Okay, let's turn our attention to what happened this month and what's coming up next. Just to restate our goals, we really have 3 areas of focus. We're going to try to build our audience growth, getting to the 100,000 download per month mark, which is probably going to take another year. We want to build engagement, deeper relationships with you, our listeners, and the overall MarTech community. And then monetization. We want to start integrating advertisers into the show's content so we can continue to invest in the show's growth and get to that $100,000 download without all of the investments coming out of my pocket personally. So on the promotion side, as a gift to myself and the show for hitting the 10,000 download mark, I invested another $3,000 in an agency that guaranteed to get the show placed in the top 100 of the Apple Podcast App Store charts for businesses for an entire month. So my rationale for doing this is, one, I wanted to test how valuable the podcast App Store was as a growth channel. Having a placement and being visible in the App Store, I assumed would drive some incremental downloads. The second thing is I also wanted to have another proof point that shows that investing in this show as an advertiser would be a worthwhile investment. And I feel like the data point of ranking in the App Store and showing up against some of the top podcasts in the world would be valuable. And the third thing is I wanted to start running some tests to try to diversify from being reliant on a single marketing channel. We love the Knit advertising platform. I love the people that work at Knit. It's been a great source for us to grow the channel. But as the Knit advertising platform grows, it could potentially become more expensive. And I didn't want to be caught holding the bag if something happened to that channel, as it does with all sorts of marketing channels. So Knit is still very much in our arsenal and a tool that we will rely on to grow the show. But this investment was a little bit about diversification as well. So last month, the show generated 11,267 downloads. And it looks like this month we're going to land somewhere in between the 13 to 14,000 download mark for the month, which means that my App Store optimization efforts return roughly 2,500 incremental downloads compared to the previous month, which makes it a rate of $1.20 per incremental download. And my feeling is that that's close, but slightly more expensive than the dynamic podcast advertisements that we run through the Knit platform. But it does give us the ability to tell potential advertisers that the show has peaked at number 26 in the United States in terms of podcasts for the business App Store. So, I consider our investment in App Store optimization to be a success. And it's something that we'll consider doing moving forward, but it also is an expensive channel to invest in. So far in total, we've invested about $10,000 into this podcast this year to drive roughly 50,000 downloads. So our total cost per download, when we look at the blended average, is hovering right around 20 cents. Now, 20 cents sounds like a really low mark, but at the end of the day, I've also got a $10,000 hole in my pocket, which means two things. One, now that our spend has hit the 5-figure club as well, and we're still pre-revenue, I'm hoping that my wife isn't listening to this episode of the podcast. And two, it's really time to start focusing on monetization so I don't have to continue to self-fund the project. So let's talk a little bit how we're going to approach monetization. There's a few things for us to figure out in the show. First, targeting. Who are we going to reach out to be potential advertisers? 2, what's the packaging? What do we offer them as an advertiser? And 3, how do we price our services? So I'm going to start off with what I think is the easy one, which is targeting. This is the MarTech podcast. You are marketers. People listen to this show because professionally they are trying to learn how to become better marketers and what are the tools and services and technologies they can use to be better at their job. So naturally, for me, reaching out to marketing MarTech services seemed like an easy fit for people that would add value and get value out of being an advertiser for the show. So what we did was we put together a list of people that have sponsored digital advertising events recently. And just as a test campaign, we reached out to actually 41 people through an email marketing sequence. We launched a sequence through a tool that we use called Mixmax. I sent personal outreach, so all of the emails came from my inbox, but they are something where I can dynamically insert variables related to who I'm talking to make sure that all the emails come off as personalized. So just to give you a sense of how we're reaching out, I'm going to read you the first email that we sent so you can hear what the copy is. So the email was titled MarTech Podcast. That's it. And the email went something like, "Hi, insert first name here. My name is Ben Shapiro, and I'm the host and producer of the MarTech Podcast," with a link to the show under MarTech Podcast. "My show tells the stories of world-class marketers who use technology to generate growth and achieve business and career success. I'm reaching out to see if you're the right person to talk to at company about potentially becoming one of our sponsors. Here's a few quick stats about our show. Number 1 ranking podcast for MarTech in Google and iTunes. 26th ranked business podcast in the world as of this month. Over 10,000 downloads per month. 130% growth rate over the first 7 months of this show. I see that company name was recently the sponsor of event that the company sponsored, which makes me think that our engaged audience of career marketers would be a well-suited target for your brand. If you're open to a quick conversation, please let me know and I'll suggest a few times for us to connect. Thanks in advance, Ben." I also included a screenshot of the show showing up in the App Store, and coincidentally, it was placed a couple spots above the Masters of Scale with Reid Hoffman and Social Media Marketing podcasts, which I felt like were pretty well recognized. So there were a couple other emails that we sent out in that sequence. One to just bubble up the conversation, one that provided a little bit more social proof where we had some people that have publicly talked about the podcast. And we sent that out over a 3-email sequence that lasted for a little bit more than a week. And fortunately, we had some great response rates from that email. Like I mentioned, we sent the email to 42 people. A couple of them bounced, so 40 people actually ended up receiving the emails. Our open rate was 88%. 23% clicked on the link, so they actually went to the show, and 20% of the people that we reached out to actually responded back. And of those 20%, the 8 people that responded back, we set 7 meetings for sponsorship conversations. Well, I don't want to go into too much detail about who's sponsoring the podcast yet, because my hope is we'll surprise you when they come on to the show. It's been really interesting to hear from potential advertisers how they view both our packaging and pricing. So initially, in terms of packaging, my thought was I would create more of an a la carte type podcast advertisement where people can buy the pre and post roll advertisements that we have been including in our show. We've been promoting Knit. We've promoted Searchmetrics, who was the original sponsor of this show, before and at the end of each show. And one of the things that we've done is we've built in a technology into our host. We use a service called Art19, which allows us to dynamically insert podcast advertising into the existing content of the show. And so when people go back and listen to older episodes, we can include new advertisement spots that are relevant to what's happening in real time. So we're able to basically sell the ad inventory for the entire catalog of our content, even though some of the episodes have been published 7-8 months ago at this point. So we're able to sell our ad inventory for our entire catalog. And in addition to not only being able to sell advertisements for people to have 30-second pre-roll or 50-second post-roll spots where we just mention some advertisers, we want to be able to integrate our advertisers into the content of this show. Now, let me preface this. When we have someone who is advertising on the show, we will expressly call out that they are an advertiser. And one of the ways that we're going to be doing that is having episodes that are product spotlights where companies can come on and talk to you, our MarTech audience, our listeners, about what their product is, who it's built for, how it works, who gets the most value out of it, and also specifically why they are reaching out to you, our MarTech audience. So we're going to be producing product spotlight episodes, which we will call out as advertorial type episodes, but we're going to make sure that we keep a high bar in terms of the content production. We're not just going to let anybody come onto the show and start hawking their wares. It's going to be products that we believe in, products that we've used, products that we're testing. And also everybody that comes onto the show is going to have to be a marketer. So those are some of the packages that we're putting together. People can buy a longer placement to tell you about their products and services. We'll make sure it's got a high editorial bar. They're going to remind you about their products and services and offer valuable discounts and demos and additional services through some of the advertising campaigns. But how do we think about pricing? Well, I did a little research and found out that it's basically the Wild West in terms of podcast advertising pricing. Having made a couple calls, done some research, done some product demos, I've seen everything from podcasts selling their sponsorship spots for dollar CPMs, which for us means that we would make $10 to $15 of revenue per month, to a marketing specific podcast like ours asking for $5,000 per month to reach their 3,500 downloads. And that works out to roughly about a $1,400 CPM. So the range is $1,000 to $1,400 if you're evaluating everything by CPM. In other words, podcast pricing right now is totally subjective. And to me, if you're interested in learning about podcast advertising, go test the Knit platform, benjshap.com/knit. I'll walk you through how to do it myself. But also try to understand how many people are actually downloading and listening to the show and start thinking about who those people are and how much you would pay to get access. In our example, if we're looking at 10,000 downloads, which was the download rate for last month, roughly, I think that somewhere between 25 and 50% of the downloads are actually listened to. Let's say it's a third of the people that download the show are actually really listening and consuming the content. For us, we know that the people that are listening to our content are most likely subscribers and that they listen to about 85-90% of the show. So people are really engaged. That means for an advertiser, they would be buying roughly 3,000 or somewhere around there listeners, not just downloads, for whatever we decide our pricing is going to be. And for me, I know that we put $10,000 into building the show to this point, and we're saying, hey, there's probably 3,000-ish listeners over a given month. We put in $3 to acquire all of our listeners. And really what I think is fair is that we ask for somewhere between $1 to $1.50. So half the value that we paid to acquire you as a listener for advertisers to get access to you. So that works out to $3,000 to $5,000 a month if you're going to buy out all of the inventory for the show. And that includes some advertorial type stuff where there's longer form content. Anyway, moral of the story is we're starting to reach out to advertisers. The goal here is not to just start spamming the show with ads everywhere, not to disrupt the content that we're creating. The format's going to stay the same, but we want advertisers to be able to have a forum to be able to reach you, our listeners, and add value, because this is a show about marketing and there are marketing tools that are out there. They are looking to reach marketers, and we want to provide a forum to help the community overall. So if any of you are interested in being an advertiser on the show, by all means, feel free to reach out. You can email me at podcast@benjshap.com. You can book some time with me by going to benjshap.com/30, which will allow you to book a 30-minute meeting with me to talk about some podcast advertising. At the end of the day, the show is continuing to grow. I think that we learned a lot by investing in App Store optimization this year. We're up to roughly a little bit less than 15,000 downloads per month, 25 to 30% growth rate. So I feel really good about how the show is growing. I feel like we're learning a lot about other channels in marketing. I hope that you find our strategy and how we're going about advertising to be useful. Mostly the email marketing trick. I hope that was useful for you and how we think about targeting. We are really trying to build a community for people that are interested in MarTech, for technology-driven marketers. So integrating advertisers into the community and also creating a place where you can engage with me as the show creator and learn some other tricks and tools and tips. I think the advertisers are really going to help that. The other thing I want to mention, our last goal was engagement. We are coming up on our 100th episode. So I've been asking for your questions, and to celebrate our 100th episode, which is coming up, I think it's actually next week, we're working on our first question and answer show. So if you're interested in submitting a question that we can answer in one of our future podcasts, go to benjshap.com/question. And we're going to answer some of your questions on the show coming up starting next week. It's going to be our 100th episode. We're really excited to find another way to engage with you, our audience. So the holidays are almost here. Thanksgiving is past. I hope you know that I'm thankful to you for listening to the show. And that wraps up this episode of the MarTech Podcast. Thanks for listening, everybody. And until next time, which I believe is going to be our 100th episode or in the next couple episodes, thanks for listening. And my advice is to just focus on keeping your customers happy.